Welcome to the AI and Data Show. My name is Matthew Holman. I'm a partner here at Cripps, and we have a very jam-packed session for you. We're going to trim it back slightly just so we can make sure we fit all the important content in. We're going to start with the content on the Council of Europe. We're not going to do the bit on Say It SARA because we have run out of time due to the tech problems, but we'll do that in the next session. And we've got some fun things to share with you about how Oasis is infringing my data protection rights. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, check out the last show and it will all make a bit more sense. Or join us for the next show where I'll show you what they responded with. What I'd like to do is put some slides on the screen and talk to you a little bit about the AI convention that was published by the Council of Europe and entered into by the United Kingdom government. Here's a slide that explains a little bit about what that convention says. Firstly, it was entered into on the 5th of September, so it's happened since we all got together last. And the convention will enter into force 3 months after the date on which the first 5 signatories have entered into the document. It was developed over 2 years by the Council of Europe and the US and Japan. It's just 36 articles and 12 pages long, which is not very long when you consider that the EU AI Act is something like 180 recitals, 100 and something articles, and 13 annexes, and 144 pages in length. So apples and pears by size comparison. Here's an interesting quote right at the end of the slide. It says, once the treaty is ratified and brought into effect in the UK, existing laws and measures will be enhanced. So says Shabana Mahmood. She is the current Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary. That feels like a really good place to come back into the room and talk to my colleague, Ben Cooper, who is joining us as an AIF coming in early to do a bit of an intro and an interview on all things AI convention. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Ben has been doing lots of research into the Council of Europe Treaty, and I thought the best way to thank him for that was to embarrass him publicly by bringing him on camera.
Thank you.
Let's start at the beginning. What is the Council of Europe, and is it the same thing as the EU?
No. Next question. No. No, they're very distinct bodies. So the Council of Europe is a political and it's a discursive body. The main purpose is to promote the democracy and human rights and the rule of law across Europe, whereas the EU is a union of the sovereign states, and they cede sovereignty to the EU to form the superior judiciary and other institutions. Their main purpose is to govern the law and trade across the EU. And importantly, we're not part of the EU anymore, but we are of the Council of Europe.
Indeed. So anyone out there comparing the EU AI Act and the Union to the Convention and the Council of Europe would be making a false comparison.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah. Well, that's good to get that cleared up. So why has the Council of Europe created a convention on AI?
So about 2.5 years ago, the Council of Europe decided that there should be some fundamental and common principles to govern the use of AI and how it should be implemented into our lives. Given their purpose, it seems to fall within their remit. So 2 years later, they produced the convention that we have today, and the UK entered into it last month.
When you say entered into it, what do you mean?
It means the UK became a signatory. So it won't actually be legally binding until the UK passed legislation to implement it into the UK law.
Interesting. So are we about to get a UK AI Act?
No. You're getting ahead of yourself.
That happens a lot.
The truth is we don't really know what the UK have in store in terms of AI law. Labour did pre-election say that they will introduce laws that will focus on the most high-powered AI systems.
Frontier AI, as they like to call it.
There we go. So, but we don't have any parameters on what that actually means. But it's unlikely to be anything like the EU AI Act.
Now, if you were to look at the convention, and I would recommend that you do, it's very interesting and important to anyone in this area, you would find that there are various duties in the convention. They cover things like equality and non-discrimination, transparency, all of the stuff that actually feels very similar to the content that was in the UK AI regulation that Lord Holmes was in the chair talking about a few months ago. How is the UK going to comply with all of the various duties in the convention?
Well, it's quite interesting because the UK government think that they do comply.
Indeed.
And they feel like the current laws and regulations that they currently have are enough to comply with the convention set out. But interestingly, the EU obviously felt they need the EU AI Act to comply. So,
well, let me stop you there. So the method of applying this convention, according to the European Union, is the EU AI Act with its many articles, recitals, and annexes and great complexity. The UK government is saying, we think we're complying with the same convention by relying on all of the laws that exist right now. They can't both be right, surely.
It's up for debate. It does depend on your point of view. I think as an AI elf, I will recuse myself from answering that.
AILs recusing themselves. Have you ever heard of such a thing? Well, as an AI geek, I'm not going to recuse myself, and I'm going to say that the EU is probably more right than wrong. So, are there any things in this convention that we should know, the beloved viewer should know about?
Yes, so there's vague wording throughout, but the articles which are probably most prevalent to your viewers would be Article 11, which ensures the privacy rights of individuals and their personal data is protected in the life cycle of the AI process. Article 8, the transparency and oversight of AI systems is key. That's going to be a key principle for development of AI going forwards. And alongside that is Article 7, which is protection of human rights and dignity and individual autonomy. Of course, there's the overarching theme of democracy and human rights and the rule of law as well.
Indeed, all very important. Are there any obvious issues with the convention? Any noticeable gaps, things like that?
Several.
Excellent.
A lot of it stems from the vagueness. So the main focus is on public authorities, but there's no definition of what a public authority is. Obviously, that's because it needs to apply to so many different countries, and each one will have a different definition. It does apply to private entities, but it's not clear how. It could be through direct legislation, such as the EU AI Act, or it could be through common law principles. And lastly, there's no enforcement regime. There's no fines. There's no penalties. So there's no way of actually enforcing the convention.
So you can't be fined for breaching the convention. I suppose an important thing or a way to think about this convention is that it's called a framework, and it is a framework. It's like an umbrella that sits over all of the laws of all of the signatory nations, and each one is meant to create its own method of implementing it. I suppose to old school lawyers like me, it's a little bit like the difference between a directive and a regulation in EU law, #EU law module for anyone who still does those. Ben, thank you very much. That was very interesting, and we'll probably do more on the convention as time ticks by, and we'll try and get you back in if you'll come.
Can't wait.
Now, we're going to do a section on Uber's fine, and I did promise to talk about it in the last show. I'm sorry that I didn't talk about it more at the time. I'm not going to say much about it again this time either, at the risk of being annoying, and there's a reason for that. The reason is partly because we started a little bit late due to tech issues, partly because we've got a really fascinating section coming up on the EU AI Act governance and compliance with Unilever, but also because the next show, which is, I think, on Monday, the 4th of November, is going to predominantly focus on the international complexities of data and AI. We're going to look at the Uber fine in great detail. We're going to pick it apart as much as we can and explain to you how on earth it landed with a £290 million fine for not using standard contractual clauses. If you're an in-house lawyer, data protection officer, person who specializes in privacy in any organization, this is a case you need to know about. If ever anyone has said to you, do we need to bother with all of this stuff regarding international data transfers, then the answer is absolutely yes. And the Uber case explains why. We will also be looking at the European Commission's decision to refresh the international data transfer SCCs. Can you believe that they're doing that again? It feels like most of us have spent the last 3 years of our lives filling those lovely forms in, and they're going to change them again, it would seem. We're going to debate all of that and more in the studio with Tim Payne KC, who is the Gandalf of data protection, I suppose. What he doesn't know isn't worth knowing. He's going to join us along with some special guests, and we'll be talking about all of those things, plus the tensions between the UK, EU, and the US, with Meta and other companies saying that they are thinking about withholding AI on account of regulatory developments. So that that episode of the show in November is going to focus on all of that stuff. So if you're really interested in those things, please join us on the 4th of November. But now we're going to go to our main section, which is all about how you can get your organization ready for EU AI Act compliance. I'm going to share with you a slide, and I'm also going to put these incredibly awesome headphones on for reasons that will become apparent. Now, if you are getting your organization ready for the EUA Act, then there are a couple of things you need to know about the process for doing that. This is a rough plan for the CRIPS EU AI Act readiness process. The first step is to create a leadership group. So if you don't have one of those already in your organization, you should have one. If you're in private practice or in an advisory capacity, you should think about advising your clients to form one. There will usually be 3 groups in that body, if you like. IT, pretty obvious why they are there. Exec, again, I hope pretty obvious why they are there. And legal. Legal will be there to do all of the stuff that we do regarding governance, risk, etc. That leadership group will start a visibility program, which is another way of saying that you're essentially checking all of the AI that the organization has. And any good visibility program will firstly have planning and forecasting. That's where the organization will look at the kinds of AI that it's planning to use in the future and start thinking about project AI and stuff like that. There will also be voluntary reporting. So that's where you go out to the organization and say, please tell us about all the AI you're currently using and not telling us about. So think about all the people using ChatGPT when they're not supposed to, stuff like that. The last is audit. That's where the organization, through itself or an external party, goes out across the organization to see what they can find is being used. It's a little bit different to voluntary reporting because it's not quite that voluntary. All of those things will feed into an analysis part of the project. That's where all of the IT, exec, legal, plus any other functions get together to crunch all of the things they found in step 2. The orange blobs correspond to IT, so tech analysis, security analysis, data hosting, all of those things will be analyzed by the IT department. And I presume, again, that the reason for that is obvious. The cost fit strategy falls into the exec team. So they will be looking at all of the big picture stuff regarding AI, and the legal team, they'll be doing everything else. So they'll be thinking about EU AI Act compliance, which is what we're going to talk about in a moment. They'll also be thinking about data protection compliance as a separate but complementary regulatory regime. They'll be thinking about contracts, of course, that goes without saying, and they'll be thinking about any additional regulatory exposure. So for example, in the UK, that could be FCA or CMA, things like that. All of those things will culminate in an action plan. And CRIPS are currently working on lots of projects like these. And if you're interested or need some help with anything like this, then please do let us know. That feels like a good time to come back into the room and to welcome Lewis Borg. Lewis, welcome.
Hey,
Can
man.
you hear me?
All good, my end.
So Lewis leads Unilever's privacy program in the US. He has advised on the development of Unilever's AI assurance process, co-authored Unilever's global guidance on the use of Gen AI, and oversees responsible AI at Unilever. Before joining Unilever, Lewis worked at the BBC and in private practice in the UK. Lewis, you are a British person in New York.
I am correct.
The lesser known version of the Sting song. Thank you very much for joining us. It is, I think, about 10 to 8 in the morning, your time. Is that right?
It's very early, yeah. Yeah.
Well, extra special thanks for joining. Even though it's ridiculously early for you, I still have to initiate you into the show by asking you some ridiculous icebreaker questions that our trainees have prepared. Is it okay if I ask you those questions?
Let's do it.
They are all themed around New York UK stuff. So I'm going to just start asking you their either or questions. First one, tomato or tomato?
That's tomato, Matt, for sure.
Coffee or tea?
Definitely coffee, and don't make me pronounce it with a New York accent either.
In-house or private practice?
Well, that's much easier in-house.
Bagel or waffle?
I think the New York bagels is probably the thing that's changed the most in my life since I moved in terms of my my diet. So bagels for sure.
Android or iPhone?
Always iPhone. Yeah.
Friends or Frasier?
I've always been a Friends fan, and I also love the part of the city that is based in the West Village is beautiful. So I'll say Friends.
Good choice. London or New York?
That's tough. I love both, but I feel like I have to say New York now, I think.
Football or soccer?
Yeah, it's definitely football. And if I ever call football soccer, that is the right time to revoke my citizenship, I think.
Oh, absolutely. If I hear you talking about soccer, then I'll personally come and bring you back to the UK myself. So thank you for coming on the show. Before we begin, could you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, no, sure. No, thanks, Matt. Cool.
I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
Fine, I can hear you. I think it's just frozen my end, but as long as you can hear me, that's fine.
Yep.
I guess first let me just say thanks for having me on. I'd love to be there in person, but I am 3,000 miles away, unfortunately. But in terms of my journey, I mean, obviously I had all of this mapped out a decade ago. I always knew I was going to be an AI and privacy shampoo lawyer in New York, right? I mean, what else was I going to do? Um, but no, I'm happy to share a little bit about my private practice. Matt, you'll know that better than anyone because most of that time was in your team working in data protection and technology, drafting all sorts of fun tech contracts, and then that I was passionate about at a point in time at because I always wanted a specialist function too, and I thought that the BBC and the media industry would be a really good next step in my career at that point in time. And I had a great time at the BBC. I joined just pre-GDPR. I worked on some really interesting projects, including some interesting AI projects like the creation of the BBC's voice assistant. So, I have very fond memories from my time there. And then I moved from the BBC to Unilever, roughly 5 years ago. I wanted another challenge at the time. Working in consumer goods, to be honest, probably wasn't on my radar prior to that, but I was really attracted to the global nature of the role at Unilever. I thought that would pose like a new set of challenges. I'd also previously worked for somebody that was at Unilever. I had a lot of sort of trust in them and wanted to work with them again. So there was a big personal factor there too. And then I spent my first few years at Unilever in our global privacy team based out of London, and then relocated to the US midway through last year to start a new role as our US DPO. The US is in a huge period of change. We have 19 state privacy laws now. That number is increasing all of the time. And we needed resource in the US. So really there was like a recognition that that I would sort of try and take that experience on GDPR compliance programs, on Unilever's global privacy program, and then lead our US privacy program. And again, also obviously grateful for the people internally that sort of recognize that's where we needed resource and also give me that opportunity to make the move. So that's a very quick overview of how I ended up in New York.
I'm sure lots of viewers be interested to hear that. We have a lot of in-house lawyers on the show today. Tell us a little bit about Unilever.
Yeah, sure. So I'd say like not all listeners will necessarily recognize Unilever, but everyone will recognize our brands. We have big global brands across beauty and well-being, personal care, nutrition, and ice cream from Dove, Tresemme, Hellmann's, Ben & Jerry's, Magnum. Obviously, there are lots of others, and we operate in virtually every part of the world too. I think the obvious next question is, but what is a company that produces soap or ice cream? What does that have to do with AI? But the reality is that AI touches every part of our business, from how we design products, how we manufacture those products, how we market those products. And that's an area that I think is really interesting, like in terms of how it's evolving with new Gen AI capabilities. And then other AI use cases like forecasting and stock management, which are probably less interesting, but equally important for our business.
Obviously, we know each other fairly well, so I feel like I could guess the answer to this pretty quickly. But there'll be a lot of people on the call who won't know any of this stuff. So let's start at the beginning. When did Unilever begin its EU AI Act readiness process? How do you get a project like this moving?
Yeah, we started quite some time ago. I'd go back to 2020 and 2021, before the first draft of the EU AI Act. In fact, I remember circulating that internally. And we have our AI Center of Excellence that were already thinking about responsible AI internally, and really led the development and build of Unilever's AI assurance tool and process, working very closely with a specialist third party, Holistic AI. There were lots of reasons for starting the work at that time and being proactive in terms of responsible AI. We had data ethics and AI principles at that point, but we had to operationalize those principles and sort of stand behind those commitments. We also needed the means to thoroughly review high risk. Can I just pause there? Can you still hear me okay? It has frozen in my end, but as long as the audio
Still hear you. Seems the video is frozen, but audio is okay.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously it took some time to build out that process, but now we have a comprehensive and sort of mandatory AI process, AI assurance process internally. And I think if I reflect back on what we did, one of the things that worked really well is we were able to introduce as part of that assurance process a comprehensive AI inventory. And it means that we now have really good visibility over where we're using AI throughout the business. And of course, we've adapted that over time. So I'd say that really meant that we had strong foundations and a good starting point for EU AI Act compliance and prep specifically. And we now have a dedicated EU AI Act squad internally leading this, and they're doing a really great job. In fact, some of them might be listening in. And that squad sort of formally kicked off. And they started with a gap assessment. So looking at what we'd already built, and then comparing that to what we had to do for EU AI Act compliance. And they're really leading that project, much like we had GDPR compliance projects a few years ago. So managing the program, tracking our progress, setting the priorities, and so on.
An EU AI Act squad sounds amazing to me. Do they have uniforms? I feel like they should.
Uniforms mandatory for sure.
You mentioned visibility. Visibility is key. It's a big part of any AI Act governance process. How can an organization like Unilever get visibility of AI use? Many of the lawyers watching this will be in very large businesses themselves, and they might feel overwhelmed at the task. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think visibility is really critical. We have that detailed AI inventory now with over 500 deployments of AI internally documented within it. But having that inventory means we can jump straight into things like the categorization of AI systems, map our compliance obligations, and what we need to do for those AI systems. I mean, that's obviously important for compliance of the EU AI Act, but I think it's also more than that, right? It helps us to understand where our biggest risks are, and again, help us think about prioritization. I'd say for businesses or in-house legal teams that are listening and don't have that, I would say, start there. Start with that fact gathering exercise, work out, what's out there, what areas of the business present the highest risk. And I also think that, you know, it's really important that that AI inventory should be AI that will become out of date super quickly.
We're
And I
going
think
to
in
take some
that
questions
sense, you
in
know,
a
I'd
second.
say, you know, it's not just around in it. You know, I'd really recommend having new AI projects. You know, if you get that bit right, I think it means that your AI inventory will always have the latest information. You can triage projects efficiently, ensure the right teams are consulted. And I think otherwise, for a business of our size and complexity, if we didn't have that one central place, that one central register, I think things would become, you know, very messy. We'd have pockets of information everywhere. So I think really try and simplify that part of the puzzle.
You're totally right. Simplify, centralize massive parts of a process, especially for an organization of Unilever's scale. But I imagine it's true for most organizations of scale.
Yeah, for sure.
We're going to take some questions from the audience. Hopefully you're their audience and you can still hear us. We've been having a few tech problems, so I apologize for those, but thank you for bearing with us. I'm going to ask Charlotte very nicely if she could help me get the quick Q&A up on the tablet in a moment. But before we get to that, one more question. How did you update your EU AI Act readiness processes in light of the developments of Gen AI from last year? Did you do anything in light of that, or did you leave everything as it was?
Yeah, no, we did. We knew we'd see a lot of demand from our brands and quickly. So we started initially with legal guidance and general do's and don'ts for using Gen AI tools, but we've really developed that guidance over time and also really tried to keep things simple. So we've really pushed our 3 golden rules internally for using Gen AI. Those golden rules are: 1, check our AI green list. We have a list of pre-vetted and approved AI tools. And I always say internally, you know, use that as an indicator of time and complexity. If it's on the green list, the approval process will be quick and easy. And if it's not, then expect a longer onboarding process because there are various checks that we need to do internally and teams that need to be involved in that review process. And then 2, review the use case, right? Even if the AI tool is pre-approved, if it's on that green list, there could still be some use cases that pose higher risks and that we need to vet, like, for example, if we're ingesting, say, sensitive personal data. And then 3, register your demand in our AI project initiation form. Again, I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think that part of the process is so important, and we should really try and keep that part simple for the business. And it means that our AI inventory is always up to date and we can quickly like triage the projects to the right teams internally.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask Charlotte really nicely again to save me because this tablet's not playing, but I did see one of the questions before it turned itself off, which was about the international element of Unilever's business. How do you collate your AI data catalog if you're spread across so many countries and territories? This is London calling New York.
Sorry, Matt, the audio's just come back now. Actually, I missed.
I'll read it once again. Given the international nature of Unilever's business, what do you use to collate your AI data catalog?
I can hear you now. Yeah, can you hear me?
I can. Which football team is better, Manchester United or Rangers?
Always Glasgow Rangers.
That question made it through. Excellent. And wrong, I should add. What's the hardest part of Unilever's AI readiness process?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have really strong foundations because we started some time ago. I'd say, you know, for a business of our size, it means, of course, it will always be there's always some complexity in terms of you know, how things might differ between different jurisdictions. But I really do think it's important that, you know, wherever we can, we try and keep things simple and have like that one central process for sure. So I think we had really good foundations to build upon, but we're starting from a good place. But obviously, if we were starting from scratch now, I'd say we would have you know, lots of challenges. But I think we laid good foundations to build on.
And another question, do you still put AI through your regular DPIA process, or does it go through its own special AI squad?
A little bit of both. So we have one simple AI project initiation point, which again, I mean, I think that's really critical. And through that, we can triage the right teams, including privacy where there are privacy risks. Within our standard DPIA process, we've also adapted that so that there are more granular, more specific questions relating to AI and Gen AI as well. But really the triage happens in that initial intake form. We're able to pick up on, you know, is this something that the privacy team will care about? And if so, we send it to the privacy team and can complete a DPIA if we need to.
And how long did it take you to complete the visibility project that you talked about? Was that the whole of the last 3 or 4 years?
I'd say the majority of that time was really like properly rolling out that assurance process. So when we were onboarding new AI tools, we already had that process in place to really like analyze those AI systems. And again, depending on like the risk of the particular AI system, the inventory was sort of an organic, natural part of that, right? Like once we had teams coming with their AI projects to go through that AI assurance process, of course, we just then naturally had a way to make sure we had like granular information on all of those projects. I'd say more recently, like last year, we've made a real conscious effort to think about how we're organizing that information properly. Yeah, again, particularly with the demand we've seen from our brands for various different Gen AI solutions.
I've got a question here from someone about marketing. They say, thank you for the great presentation, Lewis. How is Unilever approaching AI systems for marketing? Our marketing team wants to be able to safely use systems to create campaigns, but there are risks from an IP perspective. Any thoughts on that?
The audio cut out partway through and I only caught part of it. Do you mind repeating that?
So our marketing teams want to be able to safely use systems to create campaigns, but there are IP risks. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think we work in a really interesting area where there are risks, that various different legal risks that sort of cut across various different disciplines and teams internally. I think that what's really important in terms of how you organize internally, right? And make sure that all of the right people with the right subject matter expertise have a voice and a say. So I would say, you know, have a seat is, so when I talk about that AI green list, obviously one of the things that we're looking at is IP and trying to get to a point in time where, and if you're in that marketing team, you can just go into this register and see very quickly, is this an AI tool that has the right sort of protections for me to use something like that I could use in like the creation of external assets? And again, if the answer to that is yes, because we've already looked at it, then you know, then we're comfortable with like the risks associated with those specific tools. But obviously, it does vary per tool. So I think there is like a way of trying to sort of pre-vet some of them and help the marketing teams, but also understand that for other risks, that other tools that pose higher risk, that, you know, flag that it will take longer to sort of properly analyze those use cases.
I think we're going to try and do a session on AI and IP in marketing at some point in the coming program, but I don't know when. But if anyone's interested in that, please do check in, because it does have lots of tricky issues. One last question. Any advice on how to literally police the use of AI? This is, I think, policing within Unilever.
I think curate the right guidelines and guidance and make it understandable, right? I think you can only police AI, if you want to put it like that, if the business have been properly educated on like what are the risks here, what's good, what's bad. I think you can distill that into some do's and don'ts, and I think you could probably go one step further than that if you wanted to. But I think to be able to do that means providing the right guidance. And I'd say that's the sort of the onus on legal there, is to have practical and pragmatic guidance and share that widely. I think once you've got that, then policing AI becomes easier, because you have very clear guardrails on like what's good and what's bad.
And I suppose to some extent, it's like any other HR issue. There are always going to be one or two people who are pushing boundaries and doing things they shouldn't do. Ultimately, this is about creating an AI program that keeps the business in the best possible position it can be, and doesn't permit ignorance or naivety to be excuses for using systems when actually we should have a better process.
Yeah.
One last question, if I may, and that is about Unilever's AI program for the future. What do you see coming? And also a little bit about the US. You know, the US is, as you said, is in a state of real change. That is the case for many things, it would seem, not just AI. How do you see the future looking?
Yeah, sure. So I think firstly, with the internal piece, I think that, well, let me say the obvious. Our brands will want to use AI, and the demand is only going to grow. So, but if I look ahead at what I think should improve internally, is, you know, we already have a team looking at how we can looking at how we can be more efficient, how can we make it more user friendly, how can we make decisions more quickly. And again, I think that's super important for a business of our size and complexity. So our AI center of excellence internally are already thinking about those like challenging questions, and I'm really trying to optimize what we've already built. For the US, I think the short answer is, well, my opinion is that this is too much of an important issue not to regulate properly and effectively, right?
Agreed. Lewis.
And there's so much happening in the US right now. We have so much progress. There's kind of AI law in the US, the EU AI Act, in terms of some of the California governor blocking a very, I think there were some really important voices that were critical of that bill, and then others that also felt that it was at least a step in the right direction.
I'm glad you mentioned the California bill.
Yeah, it was very, very, very interesting, and definitely quite divisive, I would say.
I'm going to end our interview there, but thank you, firstly, for giving up your time. Secondly, for giving it up at such an unholy hour of the day. And thirdly, for all of your wisdom and insights. We are very grateful. Thank you, Lewis Borg, Data Protection DPO for Unilever US.
Thank you, Matt.
Let's come back into the room. I'm going to take off these amazing Britney Spears headphones. And thank you all for bearing with us there. I know the audio was a little bit patchy at times, and I'm conscious we're slightly over. We started slightly late, so we'll finish slightly late. And we're going to end, as we always do, with our AI elves giving us a bit of an update on all of the things that they have seen AI doing in the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, because this was a slightly longer month. So please welcome to the studio. Can you see us okay? We have Amy and we have James. Welcome.
Hi.
Amy, you're new to the world of AI elves, having recently started your seat. So what better way to be ingratiated than embarrassed on a well-watched webinar? Have you seen anything interesting doing about AI in the last 5 weeks?
Yeah, so I heard about Amazon's Project Amelia. So this is following the launch of the Rufus chatbot. And Project Amelia is an AI chatbot for sellers in the US. So it's currently only available in the US and in English, but hopefully that will be rolled out across the world and in other languages as well. So it's got 3 main aims. The first one is to answer knowledge-based questions. For example, how can I prepare my business for Black Friday? Or you could also ask business metrics, so how well am I pink shirt selling or something like that. And in the future, they also want to be able to respond to issues. So just say there's a issue with like suppliers, the AI chatbot will be able to respond on behalf of the seller.
So this is something like an AI business assistant for small businesses selling on online marketplaces like Amazon.
Exactly that. And I think it will really help like smaller businesses, especially if they've got less staff, to help with running a business, so it'll be more efficient. And I think hopefully other online marketplaces like Etsy and eBay might follow this trend, and it shows how AI is being like integrated into like daily business.
That's really interesting, and I imagine it will probably become very important for lots of SME clients in the AI space. So to anyone out there advising SMEs, definitely have that on your radar. James, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you back.
Thank you for having me back.
What have you seen AI doing in the last 4 weeks?
So I have seen that some researchers in the US have created a new AI framework for assisting doctors in highlighting abnormalities in medical scans. So the framework is called Scribble Prompt, and typically medical staff have had to go through multiple images by hand and trace outlines of things that they want to investigate and abnormalities. And previous attempts at producing AI systems to help with this have typically required quite a lot more manpower in actually feeding that into the system so that it can learn. But Scribble Prompt has been trained by an algorithm which allows it to identify abnormalities in any type of medical image, even images that it's never seen before. So it could have perhaps seen an X-ray, but it can identify things in an MRI scan. And it's been tested against 4 existing methods, and it's been shown to be more accurate and more efficient.
More accurate and more efficient than doctors could be the unofficial strapline for much of AI. I suspect you could probably also add lawyers into that mix. Controversial. Thank you both for your updates. I really appreciate that. It's very interesting. We're going to end the show, and I'm going to once again thank you all for coming and apologize for the technical issues. I hope you've managed to enjoy it, notwithstanding those things. We are back on Monday, the 4th of November at 12:30, when we will all be sat in the studio. There'll be no one based in New York, although we will be thinking of you, Lewis. We'll have Tim Pitt Payne KC in the chair taking your questions about international data transfers and the complexity that that regime kicks up. We'll be talking about Uber. We'll be talking about changes to SCCs. If all of those things are interesting to you, then you'll be very welcome here. We'll also be looking more at the AI tension between the UK, the EU, and the UK, particularly with some providers saying that they're not going to provide services into the EU. Will we end up with a 2-tier AI regime? All of that, plus we'll do See It, Say It, Sarah. You'll be able to see what Oasis and the ICO think about my complaints from last week. That's everything from me. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you next month. Goodbye.